Mike here. I had plans, I had dreams, and I even had a secret savings account for a special dream trip around the world that we were going to take in just a few years. I watched my wife, Tracy, blush deeply and then just continued to glow pink as she talked to a couple of coworkers during our employer's annual staff meeting at a small college in mid-September. I was standing about 15 feet away from my wife at the time and noticed her reaction while she was sensibly talking to another group of her coworkers. At our company's annual meeting at a local college in mid-September, I was standing about 15 feet away from my wife. She was chatting with another group of her coworkers, and I noticed her reaction when she was talking sensibly. Tracy spoke with Rafe and Circe, whom I had previously been introduced to as the new associate professor of English literature in Janet Barnes, who worked in the administration. It was a Christian college, so I doubted either of the other two had told a dirty joke, which meant there was only one. I noticed that Tracy's skin color, especially her consistent hue, was very intimate and aroused. I had an answer to the question I hadn't asked. After 23 years of marriage and 25 years together, you know almost everything about your partner, even if you don't pay much attention to them. If you're paying attention, it only took about 10 minutes. I thought I had a perfect marriage with an almost perfect woman. Now I was piecing together the puzzle of some recent oddities in my wife's behavior. Behavior that I had not recognized as strange until that moment. A long ride with your potential spouse is a great way to test compatibility. If you haven't killed that person, you should marry them immediately. Tracy and I fit that profile. In my opinion, our intimate life was great. It had cooled from the white-hot passion of our courtship and early marriage, but it had picked up again when the younger of our two daughters had left for college the year before. Being empty nesters for the better part of a year seemed to reignite our more lustful urges. We alternated between slow, passionate lovemaking and hardcore physical activity 3 or 4 times a week. Being regulars at the gym, we were both at 45. Tracy was in great shape. She had long blonde hair, big breasts, and a curvaceous figure. She was probably 15 pounds heavier than she was before our kids were born, but everything was packaged well. In fact, I was 20 pounds more muscular than when I left school. Plus, I had 25 years of experience. Pleasing my wife something shifted 2 months ago. It had mostly changed for the better, so I wasn't about to let an opportunity pass me by. I never thought about it while Tracy was always a willing and active participant in our intimate life. She was rarely the initiator, but suddenly she began to initiate. We had a great physical connection, but we didn't make love anymore. It was just intimate, and it was wonderful, but our focus changed. I didn't think about it at the time, but looking back, I realized it was a mistake. The one thing I did right was to pay attention to how Tracy and Rafe interacted with each other. They were always within touching distance while walking. Once I knew what I was looking at, I could see that Tracy's glow lit up every time she was near her. Even when I was nearby, it usually disappeared quickly when I showed up. But as soon as Tracy left me, she found a new companion. I kept my eyes on this lovely couple throughout the entire event, although I didn't have to try very hard. When Rafe was around, Tracy seemed to forget about everyone else. I never saw her look around to see where her husband was throughout the evening. She made sure to lightly touch Rafe at every opportunity. My emotions ranged from nervousness and fear at first to complete rage after I became convinced of the reality of everything. I was actually seeing what I saw, and it definitely looked like the end of my marriage. I practically had to drag my wife away from Rafe at about 11. She didn't look happy when I showed up and told her it was time to go. I could see anger flaring in her eyes for a moment, but she backed off. I noticed her look again, though, and it wasn't fast enough for me. After 23 years of marriage, the evening's discussion usually flowed freely on the way home. I deliberately sat quietly waiting for Tracy to begin. She seemed preoccupied with something for a while, looking out the passenger window. When she realized how awkward the silence was, she quickly jumped into the void with some meaningless conversation. Oh, about how badly dressed the college president's wife was. I wasn't very responsive, I'm afraid. I'm really tired, so I think I'm going to go to bed, Tracy said when we got home. Are you coming? She asked. I wasn't sure if she was just trying to avoid the evening conversation or if she was trying to get me to go to bed so she could deal with any disappointment from the excitement. Anyway, I didn't bite and told her I was going to watch some TV. I think she looked disappointed. The next day was Saturday, so I was able to spend the entire day outside doing yard work, which gave me plenty of time to calm down and think things through. If Tracy had any idea that things weren't so simple in our universe, she did a great job of not showing it. The following week, things seemed a little tense at home, at least from my perspective. I tried to play it cool, but I used the Find My Phone app on my iPhone about 6 times a day, and in every case, Tracy was where she was supposed to be. She seemed more than ready for a night out. She was a little reserved the first night, but after that, she returned to her earlier manner. As usual, I made sure to please her, giving her several pleasures. The following Monday, nothing had changed. But on Tuesday, the Find My Phone app told me that Tracy had gone home at lunchtime. 15 minutes later, I quietly entered my home and confirmed that my marriage was over. They weren't exactly quiet in our bedroom, so I didn't need to go up the stairs to confirm that Tracy's partner was indeed Rafe. Oh my God, Rafe! At one point during the celebration, Tracy shouted, "Oh God, baby, you are the best." The last one really hurt. It took all my self-control not to run into the bedroom and hurt the man. I had to fight the urge to run into the bedroom and hurt the man. I knew that if I started beating him, I would not stop until I killed him. None of them were worth jail time. Tracy, I know it sounds selfish, but I just couldn't go on. I love my husband more than anything in the world, and I've loved him for a quarter of a century. I hope to love him for at least another quarter of a century. In the interest of full disclosure, I also have a lover on the side. He's a wonderful person, and I'm very happy with him. Mike is such a wonderful man that I couldn't bear to give him up, even though I knew that eventually I would have to because it would be the only way to save my marriage. Mike is such a wonderful husband that I knew he would be devastated to learn that I had an affair. That's why I did everything I could to hide my affair, but I wasn't stupid. I was so naive. I thought I would never be caught. I knew that the longer this went on, the more my chances of getting caught increased. Mike has been my rock for the last 25 years. We were married for 23 years and had 2 wonderful children. He was my best friend, my soulmate, and a wonderful intimate partner. We talked about everything and laughed a lot, well until recently. I had no intention of taking a lover when I met Rafe. Cersei for some reason walked into the administration building a couple of days before school started, and without exaggeration, my life literally changed. Rafe was 30 years old, 6 feet 2 inches, and he was very fit with short brown hair and soft gray eyes. He was handsome, but he wasn't George Clooney. I didn't work the rest of the day because I couldn't stop thinking about Rafe. When I got home, I'm pretty sure I almost killed Mike with excitement. I know Mike fell asleep exhausted and with a big smile on his face. I would never tell him that I wasn't thinking about him while we were close. I continued to text Mike until he fell asleep for the next 2 weeks. Then, my wonderful husband opened the door of opportunity for me. He had to leave town for the night the following Wednesday. I knew it was wrong, but I was practically on Monday morning. I was shaking when I called Rafe to invite him to lunch on Wednesday afternoon. I had already checked Rafe's schedule and knew he didn't have any classes on Wednesday afternoon. I took administrative time off, and wouldn't you know it, Rafe met me at a small Italian restaurant and we had a good lunch, talked, and laughed a lot. We had a great time together. I had a lot of fun and I was so excited that I couldn't stop touching him. Rafe and I hadn't talked about it, but he understood what I was feeling. He smiled at me a lot, held my hand for a while, and even grinned sometimes. I could tell he felt the same way. He is Rafe. He paid the bill, then quietly asked where I live. I told him I lived 10 minutes away. Leave your car and I'll drive, I answered in a voice that sounded much more confident than I actually was. I was so happy that Mike wouldn't be home until Thursday evening. It saved me a lot of anxiety about the upcoming event, but I have to admit I was nervous. I knew that after having 2 children and being 45 years old, I didn't have the mature, young body that Rafe was probably used to. I loved Mike with all my heart and soul, but my time with Rafe was definitely going to happen, and I was so happy to give myself the pleasure. I didn't feel guilty about it at all. I drove my car into the garage and closed the door. The next 10 hours were some of the best of my life. Rafe obviously felt the same connection as I did, and everything we did was amazing. When I met Mike, I always considered him a great bed partner. Rafe completely reset the dial. Everything we did was fantastic too, and Rafe finally got into an Uber to pick up his car. I felt as spineless as a jellyfish, but it was worth it. And as brainless as a sponge, I remember a lot of screaming and some crying, and I'm pretty sure it came from me, but I really can't swear to it. Hell, I couldn't even swear on my own name now. I knew what it was like to be senseless, and I definitely wanted this. You are an amazing woman, Tracy. It was probably the best intimate experience of my life. Rafe, I said quietly as we snuggled together after our second connection of the evening. I really meant it. Mike was an excellent lover in his own right, but the way I communicated with Rafe was... It was incredible. It was almost as if we were doing something completely different from what Mike and I were doing. I couldn't feel guilty for doing something so amazing. Intimate moments with Rafe were separate from my life with my husband. The night with Mike was about emotion. Intimate moments with Rafe were about amazing physical sensations. We did this twice a week. I knew this couldn't last forever, but I was going to enjoy it while I could. Mike, I knew that Tracy was supposed to be served with divorce papers on Wednesday at 10 o'clock. Oh, goodness. It's 12 a.m. 2 minutes passed before my phone rang. Mike, I don't want a divorce, she said, her voice full of emotion. I don't want a cheating woman as my wife. I understand, I replied. I can explain. I made a decision for myself. The one we need to talk about is Tracy, she said, her eyes brimming with tears. I know, I said gently. I'll explain everything when I get home. I know you ignored our vows, but I also made a decision for myself. So, I don't think we need to talk about your decision. I could actually be really productive at work. Unfortunately, I knew what I would be faced with when I returned home, and Tracy did not disappoint. Don't you think you should have talked to me? Before you filed for divorce, Tracy was really upset with me when I walked in. We've been married for 23 years, and I just want to say that I feel like those 23 years really mattered to you. I know you were cheating on me a lot, and I'm sorry that I reacted the way I did. I could tell from your eyes and makeup that you were crying. I felt pretty down myself, but I love you, Mike. I know that what I had with Rafe was just physical, and I think you'll agree that it was a decision I made for myself. I finished for her. Tracy looked worried, to say the least. I'm sorry, I heard you, but I think you're overreacting. Can we talk about this? She asked. I don't understand what you're talking about. Tracy, you cheated several times, probably a lot more than I know. I said, I know it looks bad. I know it was just a decision for you. Tracy, I repeated, why don't you explain it to me? I thought it was obvious that I was being sarcastic, but Tracy seemed I was so surprised by her reaction that I actually smiled back at her. I can't explain it, but it's like we have some kind of special physical connection. Is this the best kiss you've ever had? I heard her eyes become as big as saucers, and for the first time she looked scared. You heard her ask with tears and fear at the same time. Do you want me to replay this for you? I was at home last week. You two were so busy that you didn't hear me. I said, I'm really sorry about this mistake. At least she had the good sense to lower her eyes in shame. It was purely physical, Mike. I love you so much. I can't even begin to tell you how much I love you. Let's at least try to talk about it. I know I hurt you, but I know you still love me. She was right about the last one, and it hurt the most. I still loved her, even if it wasn't as strong as it was 2 weeks ago. 25 years of loving someone doesn't just pass away in an instant, Tracy. Even so, I'm really sorry. I knew what I was doing was risky, but I was still shocked when I was served with divorce papers at my office on Wednesday afternoon. I had no idea that Mike knew about my affair. It turns out he not only knew, but he also caught Raph in bed with me once. Even worse, he heard me tell Rafe that he was the best I'd ever had. I knew that I would never be able to satisfactorily explain to my husband the connection. I knew that Mike's love for me would win out in the end. I'd start by trying to get Mike to agree to me keeping Rafe as an outside lover and go back to staying married as a last resort. I suggested seeing a psychologist. He agreed that our first meeting with the consultant did not go well for me. The consultant was a woman, but like Mike, she couldn't understand that I simply couldn't ignore my attraction to Rafe. I guess I expected her to show more understanding and maybe be on my side. So your vow meant nothing to you, Mrs. Mohan? She asked after I finished telling my story. No, they mean everything to me, but this is different. I explained, this is unlike anything I've ever experienced before. You are a woman. You felt aroused before. Well, it's like that, only much stronger. Like I've been drugged. I could see from her face that she didn't believe me. Mike just looked stunned. Men are often accused of thinking with their little brains, but women are guilty of it too. If today's divorce statistics are any indication, the Sultan said calmly, yes, lightning strike is a real thing, but most people understand that they have a choice to ignore it. You have decided to give in to your base desires, she continued. I couldn't believe that this woman was essentially telling me that I had no self-control. Control it was a stand-in amount to calling me a she. Then she asked me a question that probably sealed the divorce deal. If Mike could forgive you and take you back, do you think you would be able to resist your physical desires and remain faithful to your husband? I thought this woman would be on my side. I just sat there afraid to even answer that question. Mike would know better than anyone that I was lying. I love you, Mike. Please, could you work with me on this? I don't love it, but I have to have it. This is the best intimate experience of my life. Don't ask me to give this up. I cried a lot when I finished speaking. I glanced quickly at Mike, expecting to see a sign that his resolve was weakening. In the end, he admitted that he still loved me. I saw dead eyes. I'm sorry, Tracy. I really love you, but I won't let you cheat on me. I can't forgive what you've already done. I'm sorry. I wasn't man enough for you. He said you were more than enough man for me. Mike, I love you. I said I do not love him. I'll give it up if that's what keeps us together. Please don't give up. I didn't do this. You left us. The first time you had a night with him, he said, don't blame it on me. I just never knew how selfish you are. It's all about you. You just don't love me as much as I love you. I replied 2 weeks after I last saw the consultant. I was in my bedroom with Rafe. I was young. I didn't know Mike was watching me, but at that moment, I didn't care. I had seen Rafe on campus the day before, and when I returned to my office, he was more than willing to show up for a lunchtime date. The intimate was outstanding. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. During this time, Rafe and I had intimate moments dozens of times. The intimacy was always fantastic. He was my Mike. I loved him, but I also had a bit of a crush on Rafe. I just couldn't help it. I knew I'd never get Mike back, though. He didn't love me enough to let me have Rafe. I was so surprised when Tracy asked me to let her leave her boyfriend and stay married to me. I mean, if you really love me, why would you even think about that? It was just so silly. Of course, there was no way we were staying together. I may have been a bit of a simpleton, but I'm not going to be as gullible as Mike thought. I was quite surprised that the marriage counselor we hired wasn't living in the same dreamland as Tracy. She was pretty harsh in our first session, and it hasn't gotten any better since then. She ended our sessions after the fourth one by I remember telling my wife that I would never back down from my position and that she supported me. I thought Tracy was going to die when the counselor told her to stop the sessions. I don't know if Tracy asked my daughters to try to stand up for her, but they both tried very hard. "You're destroying the family, Dad." My youngest cried when I told her about this. "No, baby, I'm not." Mike replied, "Your mother did it. I'm just making it legal." She twisted her face and furrowed her brows. I could tell she was thinking hard. "You're probably right, Daddy," she finally said. "Rafe, I didn't really want to ruin Tracy's marriage. I saw it more as her husband's problem. I knew she really loved this guy. They had a physical connection and an intimacy that was almost otherworldly. If she wanted to have me, I was going to give it to her, of course. I suppose I couldn't blame him for not wanting to be cocked, but again, that's between him and Tracy. My job is not to wonder why Tracy stayed away from me for 2 weeks after Mike filed for divorce. He didn't relent and take her back, so we picked up right where we left off. In fact, things actually got better. When Mike got out of the way, I got all her physical attention. I have to say that the intimate moments with Tracy were the best I've ever had. Even though Tracy was great in bed, I never thought we'd last very long. She was not fit for marriage. I knew I wanted to have my own children, and she already had 2 grown children. I had 2 grown children, and if she could do what she did to the person she said she loved more than anything in the world, what could I expect? I continued to look for Miss Cersei, although I did not talk to Tracy about it. She already had enough on her plate after losing Mike. That all changed when I found Lucy Ralston about a year after Tracy's divorce. She was 24 years old, had short brown hair, a live dancer's body, and we hit it off from the start. I didn't tell Tracy about Lucy at first, but I finally confessed after about 2 months. I knew I had hurt Tracy's feelings, but it didn't seem like she really loved me. We were absolutely connected physically, but emotionally, we were just good friends. Lucy and I decided to be exclusive. I had to tell Tracy that it was over between us, but I left my husband for you. Tracy was really upset when I told her that. She said that I left my husband to have a night with you. She said that we never existed and that it was all about being really intimate. She said that it was my choice, but that it wasn't her choice. She said that she wanted me to have a wife and family. He said that he understood. Tracy was really upset when Rafe told her he was going to be exclusive with Lucy and wouldn't have anything to do with me anymore. I had left my husband for you, and I was really sad when he told me. Rafe gave me a look that I could only interpret as pity. I knew he was right, but it was still awkward. When my children found out about it, Mike was really honest with them. He told them I had cheated on him several times for the best intimate experience of your mother's life. The kids were upset at first, but they eventually came to terms with it. When they were a year and a half older, I told them that Rafe had left me to start a family with a younger woman, and they were really sad for me. I know it might seem a little strange, but I didn't ask my kids not to tell their dad. I really hoped they wouldn't, though I have to admit that I don't completely agree with this turn of events. When my kids came home for Christmas, my oldest daughter just casually asked if they were going to meet my boyfriend. I had to admit that we were no longer together. Together, you gave up a quarter of a century of love with your dad for a couple of years of fun with some younger guy. Wait, make that a couple of years of the best adventure of your life. My daughter said, I couldn't say much. I lowered my eyes to the floor, still feeling a little lost. Losing Mike didn't affect me as much as losing Mike. Rafe was a great bed partner, but Mike was my soulmate, my everything. Coming home to an empty apartment every day after work was heartbreaking, but at least I could look forward to amazing intimacy several times a week. When Rafe left, I had nothing left. The loneliness was terrible, so I guess I was pretty interested in dating at first. I was surprised that most of the interested men were 30 plus, some were even 20 plus. Maybe this old woman didn't look so bad for being 47 years old. I enjoyed the company of several men, although none of them even came close to the quality of my ex. Maybe it's because I hadn't dated in so long, but I definitely noticed that men's expectations have changed over the past quarter century, especially among younger ones. But at that moment, I didn't care. I had seen Rafe on campus the day before, and when I returned to my office, he was more than willing to show up for a lunchtime date. The intimate was outstanding. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. During this time, Rafe and I had intimate moments dozens of times. The intimacy was always fantastic. He was my Mike. I loved him, but I also had a bit of a crush on Rafe. I just couldn't help it. I knew I'd never get Mike back, though. He didn't love me enough to let me have Rafe. I was so surprised when Tracy asked me to let her leave her boyfriend and stay married to me. I mean, if you really love me, why would you even think about that? It was just so silly. Of course, there was no way we were staying together. I may have been a bit of a simpleton, but I'm not going to be as gullible as Mike thought. I was quite surprised that the marriage counselor we hired wasn't living in the same dreamland as Tracy. Hey guys, I just wanted to share my experience with you all. It seems like on the first date, they were expecting intimacy. If that didn't happen, there wasn't usually a second date. It wasn't that I was approved, but I also wasn't going to jump into bed with just anyone. When intimacy happened, it was usually quite good. All my partners seemed very pleased. Most of the time, it was just intimacy though. I guess I haven't dated anyone long enough to make real love. I really missed making love. When talking to the children, I tried to discreetly ask about Mike. I didn't think he was dating at all, which meant I still had a chance to get him back. I knew the odds weren't very good, but why wouldn't he date me if he was going to date other divorced women? We had a wonderful marriage for 23 years, and I really loved him. After 23 wonderful years of marriage, I knew that I would have to be the one to make the first move if I wanted to try to get Mike back. I said, "Mike, maybe you'd like to have coffee with me sometime. Together, sometimes I really miss sitting with you and chatting." "Sure, Tracy, I think we could do that." He answered cautiously, "I really miss your company." I hadn't seen her in 2 years, and she looked just as lovely as I remembered. Her hair was cut to a gorgeous shoulder length, and she was wearing a tight sweater that showed off her beautiful breasts. She didn't wear much makeup, which only made her look more stunning. I stood up to greet her. I went to greet her, but I stopped in my tracks, not sure if I should hug her or not. She answered the question for me by walking right into my space, gently kissing my cheek, and hugging me. I hugged her back, and I couldn't help but wonder, how come no one has dragged you away yet? I blushed, and she blushed charmingly, too. Apparently, not everyone has such good taste. She answered with a smile. We ordered coffee and each received a cake. We chatted about all sorts of things, just like when we were married. It was such a lovely conversation that we each drank our second cup of Starbucks, which was really rather fun. "Tracy," I said as we stood up to leave, "how about next time we have lunch together?" I think I surprised her with this invitation because her eyes widened when she looked at me. "Oh, that will be great," she said, her voice soft and warm. I called her 2 weeks later and set up a lunch date. It's been over 25 years since I've gone on any kind of date. In fact, I haven't been on a date at all since Tracy and I got divorced. I was devastated by what she did to me, but I tried my best to appear indifferent to the general public. In reality, it all just tore my heart out. After the divorce, I stayed away from all women. One Saturday afternoon, Tracy and I enjoyed a very pleasant lunch at our favorite Italian restaurant. I know she was hoping that I would invite her to my house after dinner, but I walked her to her car in the parking lot, gave her a friendly kiss on the cheek, and headed to my car. The next year, we enjoyed several lovely dinners together. I didn't want to go beyond that because it gave me more control over the situation, in my opinion. Dinner leads you to what happens after dinner, which leads you to what happens next. I did not want to and could not approach this with Tracy. Mike must have gotten smarter over the years. I knew he enjoyed the time we spent together, but he never invited me to dinner. I figured that at some point he would decide to do this and it would just be a small step towards spending the night together. I knew he wasn't dating and I thought if I could rock his world one day I'd have a chance to win him back. But he just never gave me that chance. Eating at IHOP is hardly conducive to bed sharing. I took the hint. I started dating others again. I guess I'll just have to accept it. Tracy really messed with my head. I didn't actually date another woman for 5 years. I definitely didn't view my lunches with Tracy's dates. I was in my favorite liquor store checking out the many brands of tequila available. I was looking for something new when I felt a presence to my right. It was her. She was doing the same thing as me. She seemed pleasant enough, so I decided she could use my extensive knowledge of distilled spirits. I was just trying to be friendly. "Do you want to drink tequila or make a cocktail?" I asked with a smile on my face. I never dilute good tequila. I drink my tequila like I drink my coffee straight. "Without anything," she replied, "margaritas are good for parties, but when I really drink, I don't mix them." Wow, the woman who holds the key. I didn't know a single woman who drank tequila properly. For the first time, I turned to face a woman who drinks tequila and looks damn good. There are no rings on her left hand either. She seemed a little younger than me, and she had curly dark brown hair that almost reached her shoulders, pale skin, and sparkling blue eyes. I assumed she had Irish blood like mine. I didn't realize I was staring at her until I heard her speak and then realized she was asking me a question. She was so subtle and discreet. She grinned when I returned to the real world. I know I blushed. "I'm sorry. I'm just lost," I said weakly. A dozen brands of tequila and a beautiful woman who understands how to drink this tequila in my world. This doesn't happen often. She smiled at me, wryly, and I thought she was going to move on when she spoke again. "What kind of world is this, Mr. Tequila Snob, Loserville, USA?" she asked, her voice full of playful teasing. "Ma'am, did you just call me ma'am?" I replied, laughing. "Oh, I'm so sorry. It's just a matter of good manners. My parents are to blame, but no, you don't look like my mother." I loved my mother dearly, but even on her best days, she didn't look as good as you. I couldn't believe it actually came out of my mouth. She looked surprised, then that look slowly turned into a smile. Smile! I had a good look at what appeared to be a tight, curvy body for a woman her age. "Why Loserville, Mr. Tequila Snob? If we're being polite, it doesn't look like you'll have any trouble getting a date or two. I haven't been on a date in 5 years since I divorced my cheating wife." Oh, sorry about that." There was a brief awkward silence. I didn't have enough games to break the deadlock, but luckily, it did. "What do you recommend?" she asked, returning to the tequila. "I'm a big fan of Don Julio Blanco," I replied. "I also like F's new guy, Sammy Hagar Santo, but if it's a really special occasion, choose Don Julio 1942. It's quite expensive, but it's really good stuff." It's really good stuff, though. How much does it cost? She asked, nodding at me as if ending the conversation. I grabbed a bottle of Santo from the shelf and thought, what the hell, extending my hand to Mike Mannon. How would you like to try it next door at my expense? Then you could make a more informed decision. I said, giving her my. She gave me a look that said she was being completely sincere. She grinned again, looking at me with a cheeky little smile. She accepted my invitation, and we went to a nearby bar. We spent the next 2 hours sampling tequila. I also made sure to buy us a couple of snacks when we left the bar. I had Rose Smart's phone number, and I was so excited. I can't even begin to explain what was going on in my head over the next week. I was so happy to have a beautiful woman's number, but I also had to call her and set up a date. The last time I went on a date was right before the American Revolution. I thought I could take her to a restaurant, maybe I could find a roller skating rink or bowling alley. My head was spinning. I had a good job and made decent money. For the most part, people seemed to like me. I was well aware of current events and would never talk about politics on a date. I noticed that I was sweating a lot. I realized that one thing has not changed when it comes to dating: women have all the power and they know it. However, she gave me her number without me having to point a gun at her. I thought that should have counted in my favor, don't you think? The debate in my mind raged for days and could have gone on much longer if fate had not intervened. Fate disguised as a man whom I literally stumbled upon in the hallway of the office where I worked. I was trying to decide what to do with Rose when I ran into Anna. She tripped on her 3. I grabbed her arms to keep her from falling, apologizing at the same time. I know I'm not very big, but I don't think you would have noticed that I was there if you hadn't bumped into me. After I calmed her down, Anna told me that she was probably the same age as my youngest daughter. We would talk from time to time. I would often give her some fatherly advice about something. She was also my personal consultant on issues of the younger generation. If I needed to explain something generational and I didn't want to call my kids, I would find Anna and she would explain things to me face to face in words that made sense to my 50-year-old self. Oh, it's been a year. Old brain, I muttered, sounding like a weak buffoon. Anna looked at my face as if she was trying to read the sign. She broke into her signature smile. I was puzzled. This happened often. Maybe this problem is connected with a girl or a woman. She said this in her sing-song manner. Yes, I think so. I continued to mutter. She looked at me for a few seconds, then made a decision. Okay, you can tell me about it at Murphy's after work. I don't want any ridicule when I get my ice-cold drink. You'll be on your own, she lectured. We met at Murphy's later that day. Anna sat opposite me with. She had a very cheerful expression on her face as I worried and stammered talking about Rose. So, you haven't dated anyone since your divorce 5 years ago? With no one? Wow, I knew you were a little but not to the same extent. She mimicked, and I cringed from this ridicule, but still knew that Anna was right. I also knew she's so kind and caring, so I'm curious, when did she give you her number? This month? This year? It was 5 days ago, right? Anna, if you keep being so sweet, I'll turn you over my knee. I joked, but only half seriously. Oh, we might both like this. She replied, her eyes twinkling. I blushed, laughing. Mike, what's the problem? Oh, you're not a troll, you have so much ahead of you. She told me all about some of the things she and her friends do on dates. I was so engaged, I almost forgot to take notes. Then she asked, "Can you dance?" I was like, "Who else has 3 left legs?" And she was like, "Then I'll take that." As a matter of fact, women really like it when man asks them to dance. It's a kind of physical force that speeds up the process. She said with a big, warm smile on her face. I've always thought it was some kind of urban legend, but it's true. It's 100% something like foreplay. I said, with a laugh. She covered her ears, looked at me with the same look, and grinned again. Oh, and don't forget to bring protection. You can't be too prepared. She said it with a wink. When I got home that evening, I called Rose and set up a date for the following day. On Saturday, Anna kindly advised me not to dwell on my previous marriage, but to answer honestly any questions Rose might have about it. I felt a bit awkward talking about what happened to a complete stranger, but Rose was so understanding and empathetic. She then told me her story of heartbreak, which included a 15-year marriage. After a year of marriage, my husband and I had a falling out. He was unfaithful and ended up having an affair with a neighbor. I was devastated. I had to get tested for STDs, and it was a very embarrassing experience. I remember going to the doctor's office with 2 nurses. They were very professional, but I could tell they were overwhelmed by having to deal with me. I felt terrible for making them deal with such a personal issue. It didn't get any better when I listed 6 different men as recent bed partners to notify. I heard one nurse whisper to another after she looked at my tests for the first time. I probably would have been pretty upset if she'd said that out loud to me. But I had to admit to myself that the comments sounded really bad. I haven't thought about it too much, but I've been making good use of being single the last few years. When Rafe left me after Mike divorced me, I probably went a little crazy. I think I may have been looking for someone to replace Mike and Rafe, but if that was the case, nothing even close came up. How could I replace what Mike and I had for 23 years? How could I replace the incredible intimate connection? I guess I just thought that having a lot of partners would make up for the lack of quality. I never really thought about it until I had to report the number and list of my partners. Looking back, I realized that having sex with most of my partners without protection was pretty stupid and irresponsible. I wasn't a drunk, though. I was always sober enough to know what I was doing, and I always chose guys who looked clean, and while I was always careful to take precautions. But it's an old story. When you sleep with someone, you also sleep with everyone they've slept with recently. I just never thought I had to tell anyone about my problem. Mike, Rose, and I got married about a year after our first date. We both still had some trust issues, but we worked through them with love and the help of a really good counselor. I gently pushed Rose away, and we lay on our sides facing each other, both breathing heavily from the exertion. After 25 years of marriage, when both were 75 years old, and once a week was all it took to keep the spark alive, we spent another 10 minutes or so kissing and cuddling before falling asleep. I'd say Rose was my knight in shining armor. After my divorce from Tracy, I was lost. I didn't even know how to date. She was there for me, guiding me gently as we learned to navigate the dating world together. I'm not sure I'd put money on it, but I found my soulmate in Tracy. When I came back into the dating scene after my problem, I was a little more cautious about choosing partners. I think menopause probably played a part in it. I also think that, although I looked pretty good when I hit 50, 20 and 30-year-olds weren't looking my way anymore. In fact, there were far more single women than men between the ages of 40 and 50, so the competition in these age groups was quite fierce. If anyone had asked me a few years ago, I would have told them it was a done deal. I was going to grow old with my loving husband, Mike. But because I was in a bit of a fog, nothing came of it. I greatly overestimated my performance with Mike. I got a bit confused and thought his kindness meant he was weak. I thought he loved me so much that he would at least forgive me for my wrongdoing. A few years ago, I moved into a senior living community. My old house was too big for me alone. I see my children and grandchildren every few months. It took years for the relationship I had with my children to return to normal. The relationship between Mike and me remained friendly, although we stopped having lunch after I realized that these lunches would not. Mike finally started dating again after years of being a recluse. I have to admit, I'm a little jealous of the way he looks at Rose when the whole family gets together for the holidays. I can't help but notice the adoring looks and sweet mannerisms with which they interact. It makes me a little sick, but it's so lovely to see. It had to be with me. Was it worth it? I asked myself. I never liked the answer. What do you think of what our hero did? What would you do if you were him?